Okay, we are about to start the Monday, December 12th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. We don't quite have a quorum, but we expect to have one in a couple of minutes, so thought we would just go to preliminary stuff before we reach the quorum. And just to let everybody know, if you haven't read the website, there are ways you can watch the meeting as in person. You can come to the Pinole Council chambers where there are plenty of seats available, or you can watch it live on channel 26, or you can video stream it live on the city's website at www.cipinole.ca.us, or you can Zoom video conference. Zoom details are on the agenda meeting minutes or the agenda. I'm not going to read those details here because if you don't have the information how to connect with us, I think it's a little bit too late for you to find out. But one thing that is important, that if you are on Zoom, and like I said, you can join us at zoom.us/join at webinar ID 865-05-375301. That's 865-05-375301. And you can, use the hand raising function of Zoom if you wish to talk to us. You can also call up on phone at 1-669-900-6833. That's 669-900-6833, or 1-253-215-8782. That's 253-215-8782, or 1-4346-248-779. That's 346-248-7799. Speakers will be asked to provide their name and city of residence, although providing is not required for participation. Each speaker will be afforded up to 3 minutes to speak. Speakers will be muted until their opportunity to provide public comment. When the chair opens the comment period for an item you wish to speak on, please use the raise hand feature or press *9 if connecting via telephone, which will alert staff that you have a comment to provide. Once you have been identified to speak, please check to make sure you have unmuted yourself in a video conference application, or press *6 if connecting via the telephone. Written comments can also be emailed to dhanham@ci.pinole.ca.us. That's dhanham@ci.pinole.ca.us. And please again include your full name, city of residence, and agenda item you wish to comment on. We now have a quorum, so we can go ahead and begin the meeting in earnest. By the way, my name is Dave Current. I'm going to be chair today because of the chair and the vice chair not being able to attend the meeting today. So I'm going to call the meeting to order, and we shall do the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hannum. Well, first of all, I got to do the land acknowledgement. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Ohlone people who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place Ohlone land, the land that Pinole sits upon their home. We are proud to continue this tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Ohlone community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Now, Mr. Hannum, our planning manager, could we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Menace.
Here.
Commissioner Benzuli.
Here.
Commissioner Current.
Here.
Commissioner Benuelos. Here. Vice Chair Martinez is absent, as is Chair Moriarty. So we have 4 members of the commission. We can take action, and tonight Dave Current will be our acting chairperson.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to item C, which is citizens to be heard. The public may address the planning commission on items that are within its jurisdiction and not otherwise listed on the agenda. Planning commissioners may discuss the matter brought to their attention, but by state law, the Ralph M. Brown Act, action must be deferred to a future meeting. Time allowed, 5 minutes each. Justin, do we have any? Anybody who wants to be heard?
Yes, Chair, we do have a hand raised. It's from the person with the phone number ending in 5748. When you're ready, please press *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay,
And you can press *6 whenever you're ready.
Hello, can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Yes, my name is Anthony Losbrink, a longtime senior citizen of Pinole, over 40+ years, homeowner and tax-paying citizen. On behalf of myself and some of my friends, neighbors, and other members of the community, I have 3 or 4 items I'd like to bring back to the city of Pinole to find out what the status is. Number one, what is the program or status with the changeover or renovation of the caretaker's house on Adobe Road, 1270 Adobe Road, adjoining the dog park and a barbecue grove over there. And it's been vacant for over a year and a half now. And city manager Andrew Murray told us 4 or 5 months ago he was going to get back in a city council meeting in 2 to 3 months in short order to give us an update on what's happening to that caretaker's house, and he hadn't done that yet. So shame on him, because rumors are flying that, oh, it's going to be shut down or closed, or the city garden club, Pinole Garden Club wants to take it over, which I think might not be a bad idea, to let them have half of that house dedicated to the Pinole Garden Club with a nice community garden on about 1.5 acres of property back there with planter boxes, and the other half of the house could be dedicated to historical society as our historic site, and get off the Faria House bandwagon to save us millions of dollars a year trying to restore the Faria House. The 5-6 bedroom house over there at the caretaker's mansion can be used as that, if not maybe a historical designation as well, because it used to be an old previous mayor of Pinole's house that was moved up from the Fernandez Park area years ago when they put that there. And we're losing close to $2,000 a month minimum of rental income from that property as well, being vacant. And they've had crime problems on that street and everything. The weeds are overgrown in the front and side yard that need to be cut down. They're violating fire codes with old bushes and weeds all over the property. And there was some homeless encampment a year ago that was going in there, but the police took care of that, thank God. But it's still vacant, and things can happen with vacant property. Adjoining that trail, the fire trail needs to be retrofitted on Adobe Road, going all the way out to provide ingress and regress access to the back half of Pinole Valley Road, specifically on the fire trail crossbar 74, number 74-16 on the 3900 block of Pinole Valley Road. That, I might add, is halfway blocked with fallen debris and trees as well. All that was supposed to have been addressed with Fire Chief Coons over 4 years ago or 5 years ago before he left. And he told us that at a meeting on television that the city of Pinole, the county, and or the state is supposed to fix that breach on that fire trail by the creek going out behind the caretaker's house at the back end of Adobe Road. Even Mayor Fitzer said it's going to be fixed sooner or later. And nothing has been done there, just a sign, and the rains and waters haven't helped that issue. And then as far as another fire trail road issue, what is going on with the Galbraith Road fire crossbar closure at the end of Galbraith Road, number 74-29 fire trail crossbar there? The city or somebody went in and built a brand new fancy barn gate, and they cut off the lock to the crossbars. So how come some fire trail crossbars have padlocks or combination locks of sorts, and others have no locks at all? And is the city gone on record that they're going to open up Galbraith Road to all the cross traffic and other things going in through Rancho Road and El Sobrani? We need that to be answered by the City Planning Commission. It's not one of the directors.
Anthony, you have used up to 5 minutes. I don't know if you got through all three things, but your time is up. If there's something you quickly want to say in 10 seconds, you may. Okay. I guess Anthony brought up about the 12,000 Adobe Road and the Galbraith. I'm not sure if he had any other things to say.
Yeah, I mean, we would have to check with fire. I mean, with all the turnover with fire and how and what they're doing with that, we'd have to talk to the chief and see what they're doing with with the fire breaks and the fire trails. Regarding the actual house, I'm not sure. We have, community development hasn't received anything regarding the house, so I'm not quite sure where we are with that as well. That's something we can look into.
Okay. I think it's an interesting idea, to utilize that space. I think I could see it, being an interesting idea. So anyways, thank you, Anthony, for, taking the time to call. I hope we answered your questions. Are there any other ones, Justin?
No, no one else online, but it seems like Commissioner Menace has a.
Go ahead,
Right,
Raphael.
so I just wanted to note, and I think this is probably the point where I should note ex parte communications. I had an ex parte communication with Tony Bosbrink about some of the items he brought up tonight about an hour ago or so. And I've also had ex parte communications I sent out to members of the public in Pinole, just letting them know about this meeting and some of the items that were going to be discussed. I believe David Hannum said this would be the appropriate way to notice that. So I'm noticing it.
Okay. Any other, Tim or Adam, do you have any comments?
No.
Thank you. Justin, anybody else, want to be heard?
No, no, Chair Current, that seems to be it.
Okay, I will close this as to be heard. We'll go to the next item, the meeting minutes of Planning Commission meeting minutes of October 24th, 2022. Anyone have anything on that or want to make a recommendation about approval or?
I'll move approving.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for your motion.
Second.
Adam, thank you for seconding. Okay, let's bring it to, I guess we have to do a roll call.
Yep, here we go. Commissioner Menace,
Aye.
Commissioner Benzuli. Commissioner Benuelos.
Aye.
Chair Current.
Aye,
Motion carries 4-0.
thank you. All right. We will begin the public hearings. At the beginning of each item, the chair will read a description of what that item is stated. Well, since there are no public hearings, so I really have to say that. No, I guess we do. Oh, no, we have one, of course, yeah. At the beginning of an item, the chair will read the description of that item as stated on the agenda. The city staff will then give a brief presentation of the proposed project. The commission may ask staff questions about them. For those items listed as public hearings, the chair will open the public hearing and ask the applicant if they wish to make a presentation. Those persons in favor of the project will then be given the opportunity to speak, followed by those who are opposed to the project. The applicant will be given an opportunity for rebuttal. The public hearing will then be closed and the commission may discuss the item amongst themselves and ask questions of staff. Commission will then vote to approve, deny, approve, or modify in a modified form, or continue the matter to a later date for decision. The chair will announce the commission's decision and advise the audience of the appeal procedure. No public hearings will begin after 11 p.m. Items still remaining on agenda after 11 p.m. will be held over to the next meeting. And our public hearing number 1 for today is the 2023 through 2031 housing element update recommendation for adoption. The planning commission is requested to consider making a recommendation to the city council for a general plan amendment to adopt the 2023 through 2031 housing element. As an element of the Pinole general plan and in accordance with the California Government Code, the housing element represents a comprehensive set of housing policies and programs to address identified housing needs for the city of Pinole for the 2023 through 2031 planning period. The project is exempt from California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, pursuant to section 15061 B3 of the state CEQA guidelines, common sense exemption. Because 1, it can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the proposed 2023 through 2031 housing element would have a significant effect on the environment. 2, no property rezoning is needed to accommodate the city's regional housing needs allocation. And 3, potential residential development densities have already been analyzed and mitigated into an earlier environmental report. The full public review draft housing element issue date October 14th, 2022 can be accessed online at www.landuseplanningforpinole, that's all one word, .com, or at the Community Development Department, it's the City Hall, 2131 Pear Street. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Current. Tonight, again, as Chair Current stated, we were talking about the 2023-2031 housing element update. Tonight, we also have with us Dan Weary and Shannon Liska of MBI, and they'll be here tonight also to help with the presentation. The housing element, for some background information, the housing element is one of the 8 mandatory elements of the general plan and is required by the California state law to be updated every 8 years. Of course, the city updated its housing cycle last in 2015 as what we would consider the 5th cycle housing element update. This housing element was certified by the state and as being in compliance with state law. So that's the housing element we've been operating under the last 8 years. In the city of Pinole, in coordination with consultants, Micro Baker International, we've been preparing to update our city housing element as required by state law. And the updated housing element must address what land use planning steps the city will take such that it would be possible for the city to meet its regional housing need allocation. And of course, we've discussed regional housing need allocation, which is the number of units the state authorizes through the Association of Governments, and comes down to the counties and the cities to provide under numerous income levels. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I want to kind of give a brief overview of the process that we followed to get to here. It's been a fast pace, but I think we've done a great job in terms of community engagement with our consultant MBI. March 22nd, 2020, we received an introduction to the land use planning Pinole process, which included an update to the housing element, as well as the existing health and safety element, and a new environmental and justice element, which that's not a mandatory element, but it's an element that we need to add as part of our housing element update. We did a multilingual English, Tagalog, Cantonese, and Spanish online community surveys were released. We did that for a number of months. It was heavily promoted through the email and notification and the website, which we provided a website for residents to be able to give comments to. We sent out flyers and postcards. We sent out social media posts, banners. Of course, you've seen some of our banners over the years across San Pablo. We've also done stakeholder interviews and community workshops. And actually, we had 149 community members take our survey. So that was a pretty good turnout for the city survey. On May 11th, the first community workshop was held. And then on June 9th, we had our second community workshop. And then we did on June 30th, we did a focus group interview. It was held with Friends of Pinole Creek Watershed, Pinole Valley Community Church, and a property management company with the city of Pinole, within the city of Pinole. On July 13th, 2022, the City Council and Planning Commission, we held a joint public hearing to discuss and get a comprehensive review of the update of the housing element. And of course, in July 25th and 26th, we had stakeholder interviews with the Pinole Rotary Club and the Contra Costa Association of Realtors. That was held to gather more input regarding issues inside the community and what the community faces and recommendations to alleviate some identified housing issues. So with them. October 17th, 2022, the first draft of the housing element was released for public review. A copy of the draft is on the city's webpage, which links to the dedicated general plan update, and a public review hard copy available at City Hall. So if there's still people out there that want to comment, it's still there to be commented on. And we also had access through our land planning Pinole website, and so it's also there as well. On October 26, 2022, the Planning Commission reviewed the draft housing element with focus on programs and policies, in addition to opportunity sites, and provided feedback and recommendations to the City Council. On November 15th, the City Council reviewed the draft housing element with the focus on the programs and policies, in addition to opportunity sites and recommendations presented by the Planning Commission for enhancement of the housing element. The council directed some immediate changes, which we can kind of go over, and it's within the staff report tonight. as well as regarding the remainder of the commission's comments and some of the actions and that's also discussed as well later in the staff report. The council authorized staff to submit the revised draft housing element to the state clearinghouse, or just not the state clearinghouse, to the HCD, the Housing Department of Housing and Community Development, for their initial 90-day review, and as Exhibit A of your resolution tonight. Kind of give the analysis of the draft housing element. I'm going to kind of at this point, I'm going to, if Dan and Shannon are there, I kind of want to turn over to them a little bit and kind of go over the presentation. So if they're there tonight. There he is. Okay.
Sure, I'm here.
All
Okay,
right.
great.
Sorry for nervous. I couldn't see you there, so I was like, "Uh-oh, is he there tonight?" So
Yeah, hiding in the background. That's
yeah.
good. Well, good evening. So you've got the slides, David. If you could just kind of advance that, I'll go through. And I'll just make sure I got this my page correctly. Great. So great. We've got a fairly short slide presentation. Sorry, I'm just getting my pages set up here. Bear with me 1 second. Move this over. There we go. That should do it. Gosh, it keeps moving. Sorry, hang on a second. Every time I click on one page, the other one disappears. Okay. Well, great. So as we get started, I just want to give you a quick overview of the purpose for tonight. It's actually pretty darn focused. Our purpose is to review the changes to the housing element that were made since we met with you back in October 24th, and the City Council also met on November 15th. Those revisions were made and submitted to HCD for their 90-day or up to 90-day review. Those were submitted on December 2nd. So we want to bring you up to speed so you know what we did. The Planning Commission had a number of recommendations to City Council. We incorporated those. Some were already addressed. Some required some additional revisions. And there's still some that can be considered independent of the December 2nd housing element update. So the real purpose for tonight is there's a public hearing to get your recommendation to the City Council on whether or not they should adopt the draft housing element at their meeting on January 17th. And then we can also talk about some additional programs and things that can be done independent of that draft or in addition to any future revisions to the draft. So next slide, if we could. So real quick on this slide just shows kind of a quick summary of the major changes that were done here. One of the big ones was the Kmart Pinole Vista site, excuse me, was approved. I believe that was on October 18th. And so that's a pretty significant change. That's 223 units, including 27 below market rate or lower income units, and then 196 market rate units. And so that's a big change, particularly since your entire RENA for the city, that's the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, that's our requirement as part of the next 8 years, was 500 units. So this one project, met a significant chunk, almost half of your entire RENA for the next 8 years. So with that, that kind of rebalanced everything. We wanted to include that important site. So with the addition of that site, we eliminated a few others, mostly above market rate units that were elsewhere in the city. Since we had this site, we want to count it, particularly because it also included those 27 below market rate units. So we had, with that, again, as I mentioned before, 196 market rate units. So we had other sites in the city that were needed to meet our above moderate income RENA, and we no longer needed those. They were excess and extras. So we took those off the map, the list, and then we made appropriate changes throughout the site's inventory and affirmatively furthering fair housing chapters. So also, one of the things that we did, because we had that excess, we decided we would let HCD know that not only are we meeting our RENA plus a 20% buffer and then a few extras, that was our target, We actually have a backup inventory that's even greater. So if you think about our arena, 500 units, we have a 20% buffer. We're targeted around 600 units, and that's broken across all 4 income categories. We actually have a number of sites that we identified previously and under consideration that meet the state requirements. So we have those in reserve. We actually have enough to effectively replace the entire proposed arena as backup. It's a great position to be in. We're extremely fortunate to be in that situation. So those are the big changes. We had the Kmart Pinole Vista site. We made the according revisions, and then we've created this backup inventory. So next slide. So let's see here. So this is just a little bit more detail about some of the other changes we made. One was we added a glossary of terms. There's a lot of acronyms and abbreviations. So we included a glossary right up front so people can kind of get oriented toward the rest of the next 250, 300 pages. We noted that we've got translation assistance available. I think David may have noted in our early community workshops, we actually had interpretation into 4 languages, well, interpretation into 3 languages that was recorded. Our online surveys were put out in Spanish and English, and interpretation services and translation services are available. And that includes going forward. So anybody that has an issue, needs some assistance reviewing and understanding the document, can contact the city and get that assistance. And that's right up on the 2nd or 3rd page of the document. We updated some other data. We had some cost valuation data that was referenced in the document. It's since been updated since we prepared the first draft, so that was updated. We included more details on the community engagement process. David mentioned all the different opportunities that we had. So we were a little light on that, frankly. So we included a lot of the materials and examples of all of that was going on throughout this whole process. And then we included compliance with the public review process. So there are some statutory requirements, and that was the 30-day public review followed by a 2-week review process before it goes into the HCD review for up to 90 days. So we need to explicitly state that, and we did. Some of the recommendations coming out of the Planning Commission from October 24th were to provide, promote, and incentivize teacher housing for teachers. So we included a eligibility or teachers as part of the owner-tenant matching program. So that'd be specifically trying to find housing for seniors, low-income households, et cetera, and that could include teachers. So they're looking for a place, and we've got some units available, try to match them up between owners who have units and renters who could use one of those units. And then lastly here, we referenced that as part of the engagement process. Again, while we're preparing this, the city recently adopted its new communication engagement plan. We thought that was important to include in the housing element. Great, so if we go to the next slide. So real quick, these next 4 slides include a little table. And these are roughly the same information you had in your staff report. So we took those Planning Commission recommendations. We identified in the second column how they're addressed in the housing element. And then in the third column, there's a couple of those that we felt that really needed more work and consideration before the city could make a commitment to those in the housing element. So these are things that can occur. Again, the housing element establishes programs and specific commitments for the next 8 years. Those are your minimums. You can always do more, and you can always do additional programs and things. So these are things that are possible considerations over and above what's in the draft housing element. And if it gets adopted and it gets certified by HCD, these are things that could move on, that the Planning Commission can recommend to City Council to make another official program and provide resources to pursue those independently. So let's kind of go through them real quickly. Again, the comments, add the 223 unit Kmart Pinole Vista site. We did that. Allow and encourage single and small unit room rentals. And then as you can see here, there's a number of different existing programs in the housing element that accomplish that, from accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. There's a whole variety of promotional programs or ways to incentivize those. We have the tenant owner matching program in there. We wanted to note that single room occupancy units are also already allowed in 5 zones within the city. And then there's a requirement to amend the zoning law to meet the new state housing laws that keep getting adopted. And specifically with respect to small units, there's a new law, AB or new bill, AB 352, regarding efficiency units. And the minimum size is reduced from what it used to be. And so that'll be a change in the zoning law to help implement that. So there's a variety of things there to encourage single and small unit room rentals. The last row on this page is promote and incentivize affordable housing on religious facility sites. It's something we discussed at length on October 24th. And again, quite a bit with the city council on November 15th. Currently, there are programs here to outreach to faith-based organizations in program 3, also providing technical assistance for any applicants that would come in and propose housing on a faith-based or religious institutional site. And again, there's also new state laws that require amendment of the zoning law to implement them. And that includes, and there's a couple there specifically for religious facility sites. Those are AB 1851 and AB 2244. Those are both talking about parking. And actually 2244 amends and clarifies 1851. But it basically reduces and allows greater flexibility with parking on religious facility sites so that they can accommodate and build affordable housing. So in the third column here, we mentioned that if you want to do even more, we think you're in really good shape already. But if you want to do more, we note that consideration could include allowing multifamily housing on religious institutional sites where they're not currently allowed. I will note that they are allowed in a variety of zones where both religious facilities and multifamily housing are allowed. There's a couple of zones where religious institutions exist, but residential uses or multifamily uses are not allowed. So those would be a couple of sites that could look into further, or different approaches to look into whether the city would want to expand the permitted uses to include a multifamily on religious institutional sites in additional zones in effect. So in the next slide, we've got, here we go. So the next slide shows our map. And currently there's 8 religious institutional sites, and there's the little table up at the top. They're labeled A through H, and their addresses are on there, and then their existing zoning is noted there. So the ones, and then on the map, you see the letters in a little circle, and that's where they're located, A through H. The ones with the red circle around them are the ones where multifamily housing is currently not permitted. So in those zones, that's really the R1, which is your lower density residential zone, and your PQI, which is the public quasi institutional zone. Correct me if I get the name wrong, David. But so in those 4 sites and those zones don't currently allow multifamily housing. So again, it's currently permitted in those other zones that are mentioned there, the RMU, the HDR, the MDR, the CMU zones. So there's a number of different zones where housing on religious facilities could occur, either with an existing religious facility or even future religious facilities. So that's a consideration. There's a number of different ways to go. One of the questions would be, if planning commission recommends that city council and city council agrees, yeah, let's look at this further. Maybe we can expand this where these could occur. One consideration is, do you allow it only on those existing religious institutional sites, those 4 in the red circles there, where they exist, or do you allow them in the zones, which would allow for any future religious institutions that might get built to also include housing in those zones? And again, those zones would be the R1 and the PQI, where they're not currently permitted. So we can come back to that. I just want to kind of discuss that a little bit, introduce the idea. If we go to the next slide, we've got a few more of the Planning Commission recommendations. And then we'll go through these real quick. And we've got another map, and then we'll basically be done. We'll have open discussion. So again, the other recommendations here are consider more protections for renters to prevent and minimize displacement. And we note here that the housing element has an outreach and educational program with a variety of programs in there, including a meeting workshop that would include discussions of tenant rights, state rent control laws, and source of income protection. That's program 20. So I think that's a really good program to make sure everybody's aware of their rights and responsibilities as either a tenant or a property owner. I'll go through, well, I guess I'll talk about the opportunities for future consideration. So some additional programs, which are more complex, more involved, more resource intensive, include these in the right-hand column. That would be requiring a right of first refusal or an option to purchase. That's an approach that some cities have taken, so that if there's, for instance, an apartment complex that's being converted to condominiums, those existing tenants get the right of first refusal to basically buy their unit or another unit in the complex. Another idea that's been used is to make sure that any tenants get advance notification, or a minimum notification, I should say, wouldn't necessarily be advanced, but minimum notification period of time to be determined, and if necessary, relocation assistance. So again, they just don't get kicked out and end up couch surfing or living in their car or homeless, heaven forbid. The last bullet here is perhaps the most resource intensive and require more consideration would be just cause eviction ordinances. A number of cities have taken this up even very recently. So again, try and prevent just random evictions or evictions for any reason, so that people can remain in their homes or at least have a chance of finding alternative housing. And so there's a number of different approaches there that might be considered. We think these come with, some other concerns and issues that we probably want to be, investigated further. Probably want to have additional community engagement, stakeholder engagement to discuss these ideas and the variety of different applications and how they could work. Probably want to talk to tenants associations, renter or landlord associations, make sure we're talking to the affected people as part of any program to implement that. And there'd be some other research, obviously, best practices and things like that. If that's a program that Planning Commission wants to recommend to City Council to really pursue, at any time, really. The second row here is encourage additional efforts to obtain more input from Pinole's diverse population. We had a really robust engagement process, but I think one thing that we noted was, we would like to have more input from some of the harder to reach communities and communities that don't necessarily participate as much as others. So to reflect, the full spectrum of the community. So in the housing element, we again mentioned including reference to the new Pinole communication and engagement plan, which again will be implemented independent of the housing element, but the two should kind of work together. Housing outreach should include engagement with public agencies and community and faith-based organizations. We have a program in there, program 3. So again, working with those organizations that have the ear and can represent, a variety of constituents there. And then finally, we note that there can be continued outreach to all segments of Pinole, and there's a number of programs that are part of that education and engagement set of programs that include programs 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, or 18 through 22. One of the things that we said for an opportunity for further consideration would be to continue and strengthen partnerships with community-based organizations that are active in Pinole, to again try to increase the education and engagement with specific populations. So that could be going to churches or advocacy groups, any group or organization or agency that represents any particular group that maybe is underrepresented to date or in general. So those are some opportunities there to continue to pursue. And I think that recommendation, frankly, is pretty consistent with the city's new communication and engagement plan. The last one here is to promote and incentivize affordable housing for teachers. So we talked about doing it for providing it on affordable or a religious institutional site. This would be to allow for teachers, perhaps doing affordable housing on school sites. And so with that, we did note that teachers are included in the owner-tenant matching program. That's program 10. But if you want to have additional programs or, kind of go the extra mile, one additional program that we thought the city could pursue is to add or allow employee or faculty housing on school sites explicitly. Right now, the zoning's silent. So the assumption is that probably would be a separate and independent use. So the zoning could be changed to say, hey, we can include, employee or faculty or possibly even student housing if you had a place of higher education. So those are some ideas. And on the next slide, we show, there we go. There's our map. And so this shows where the schools are throughout Pinole. All the school sites have the same PQI zoning, which does not allow housing on them today. So that would be a significant change to the zones to allow that. And again, like with religious facilities or some of the other recommendations, such as, kind of rent control or anything like that, you probably these programs would have, kind of their own engagement process, additional study and analysis. You might even have a subcommittee or again, work with the Planning Commission to study these further going forward. But we thought these were some interesting ideas to pursue and kind of following up on the Planning Commission recommendations. And then here's ways that, again, how they're addressed in the housing element, and then also maybe some additional ways if you want to go further and study those and kind of independent of what's already been submitted to the state for its 90-day review. With that, I think we can go to the next slide, and this just shows where we are in the next steps. So again, the housing element was revised after the conclusion of the public review process and after the Planning Commission and City Council workshops. That's in for its up to 90-day review to HCD. The city has requested an expedited review to see if we could get comments back before the scheduled adoption on January 17th. That would allow the opportunity to make some revisions if HCD has any concerns. We haven't heard back yet. If past holds true for the future, we probably won't hear until about the 88th day that they have some comments, and they'll be coming out shortly. So as I noted, the January 17th is the scheduled city council hearing and adoption. We want to do that because the statutory requirement to adopt this housing element is January 31st. give us a 2-week window there to get that done, and it falls on the regular city council agenda. So that's nice. Hopefully, if HCD takes their full 90 days, we'll get comments toward the end of February, early March. And we look forward to a certification letter, or what's called a certification letter. It's actually a letter of substantial compliance with state housing law. That's the official term, and that's the official determination that we're looking for. We believe that the housing element is substantially compliant in all regards. And as I've mentioned through all the workshops from the very beginning, Pinole is way ahead of most cities. And the fact that you've already met much of your RHNA, your regional housing needs allocation for the whole next 8 years. And that 8-year period hasn't even started. It doesn't start until February 1st or January 31st. You only need another 83 units plus or minus to meet over those next 8 years. We've got a great sites inventory that's available. In fact, we have a full replacement sites inventory. So if any of those sites fall out or don't develop as intended, we've got a lot of backup. So you've got a great housing element. You're in a great situation. So again, we hope, and we'd like to hear from HCD that hopefully that you make a recommendation to City Council. City Council adopts this in January, and we hope to hear back, before early March from HCD that they agree that this is a substantially complete housing element, and you're good to go. You're off to the races. You can start implementing, or you can start implementing at any time. But the official clock and commitments that are in that housing element, where we say, we will do X, Y, and Z in terms of these programs, we will implement them or take these important steps within 6 months or a year of adoption of the housing element. That clock will start ticking as of hopefully January 17th. If HCD does not agree that it's substantially complete with state housing law, then they will submit a letter, and we'll have, we'll hopefully respond to what we would anticipate would be relatively minor comments, make revisions, circulate that again for a minimum of 7 days for public review, and then resubmit the revised draft to HCD for up to 60-day review. So that's that March 2023. If that happens, we'll get those revisions, and then we'll go through the same process that we're doing right now. We'll come back to Planning Commission with a revised draft for readoption, reapproval, go to Planning Commission and City Council. That could happen, as early as April, and then hopefully get resubmitted to HCD for its final letter of substantial compliance, AKA certification. So that's where we are. I know it's probably a little longer than you wanted, but that's, I think, a pretty comprehensive update to where we are overall in the process. So in general, again, the purpose is to understand the changes that we made. Hopefully I've done a good job of that. Happy to answer any questions. And then the real purpose is to get your recommendation to to City Council regarding whether or not they should adopt this on January 17th. And then if you'd like, we can discuss any of those additional possibilities and programs going forward. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Wary. I mentioned this last meeting. I'm very impressed in the work that you have done. I've seen many general plans. I used to be on the Citizens Advisory Committee of the county's Transportation Authority, where as part of the Measure J or Measure C before that allocation of funds, every jurisdiction had to submit a plan about implementing housing opportunities. And I have read many general plans and housing elements, and this is very impressive. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. Before I turn, we ask questions, but I just want to get a little bit of clarification here about the handouts that we received. when I was reading this, I was kind of under the impression that the handouts we got with the additional comments here that were, from the following the November 15, 2022 City Council meeting. I was under the impression that they were already part of the housing draft that we got, and I'm beginning to realize that that is not the case. Is that a correct statement?
Well, the red line copy, the red line copies were all included. So the first table, table one, all of that was included as part of the housing element drafts. The second, where we talked about the planning commission recommendations, all of the topics discussed tonight were addressed in certain programs. Excuse me, sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. Or were included as part of the programs, but these were just, there could have been some additional data that if the commission wanted to recommend to the council as part of that we included that. So everything that says, program, 10, 11, that's all been included as part of the draft housing element that we sent off.
Yeah, I didn't see that with, I know with program 10, where was I was looking at that, where there was.
Yeah, I mean, it was included as part of the element. So, and all of the red line, when you go to, the first table, we talked about the red lines, those were taken after the council meeting. So those were like the council's changes that they wanted directly. And so those got implemented prior to the submission to the state. So we were just showing you where we made the changes, at least in table one, to the housing element prior to the submission. And then in table two, which was the additional planning commission recommendations, we went back to show where they were kind of talked about or covered under the draft programs, as well as if there are future considerations that you would want to add to the council prior to it going back to them on January 17th, 20.
Yeah, because I'm still confused, because if I looked at the housing element update, for program 12,
Yeah.
it has a lot of the language there, but it doesn't include these. If I'm looking at page 5 of the handouts and page 160 of the draft document, comparing the two, and there seems to be a lot of verbiage there that's not included in the specific commitment, and so I'm a little bit not sure about if there's a completeness with the draft document that we poured over at offline, or whether we need to incorporate anything that was presented here in our handout into the document.
It's the only thing that you would, Dan, you can chime in if I'm misstating, but if there are additional things that you would like to add, that would be part of the future considerations as you wanted to add those into the housing element, or to develop policies or programs that would address those future considerations.
Okay, so we can use the draft document as what we're looking at to approve, and not, we would consider anything else somewhere down the road.
Yes.
Okay. Which brings me up to my second question, that if we do not meet the deadlines that HCD has set for, getting something by January 30th approved, what does that mean to the city of Pinole?
Or refer that to the city attorney.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the city, as was mentioned in the presentation, the city's plan is to for the council to adopt something by that deadline. And then if after the fact, the ACD comes and says, no, you're not in compliance, we would go to fix something. There are two things that could potentially happen. The first is, if you don't have a compliant housing element, you can be ineligible for funding for various grants and other things. The second thing is that there's something known as the builder's remedy in state law that essentially right now, you may recall from some of the housing projects we've talked about the Housing Accountability Act.
Yes.
And basically under the Housing Accountability Act, normally a city can deny a project that doesn't meet its, zoning or general plan, land use designation. That can be the basis of denial. The so-called builder's remedy is if we don't have a compliant housing element, we can't use that as a basis to deny a project. that someone doesn't comply with the zoning or general plan. If the project is either 20% affordable to low income residents or 100% affordable to middle income or moderate income residents. So that is a potential risk. I hopefully, the city it's approved, but even if it's not, the city's in position to, quickly address any changes. So there's not a non-compliant housing element for a long period of time, that would open the door for people to submit those types of applications.
Okay, now, given that we may not have a completed housing element by January 30th, how exposed is the city of Pinole? If these HCD is in the process of reviewing and they substantially agree with it, are those penalties or considerations that you just went over, are those really applicable to Pinole, or is that something because we're showing good faith that we wouldn't expect any negative impact?
The city's position is that we are adopting, when the council adopts the housing element, they will be adopting a compliant housing element. And so anyone who claims that we're not, we would potentially, disagree with that and address HCD's issues as quickly as possible to address those. I don't want to comment on any potential project, it depends on the situation of the project. And that sort of thing, we don't, just as a general statement, there's a lot that goes into developing a project. We're not
Yeah.
aware of anyone sort of waiting in the wings. I
Sure.
guess someone could be out there planning along.
Okay,
But you got to still come up with an application. That's not something generally you can just throw together in a day.
yeah. Okay, I given that information, I think it's prudent for us to actually get HCD to approve a housing element that generally complies with what our wishes are as soon as possible. I'm recommending to the commission that even though I think there's a lot of really fine things in the future considerations that we want to have, I think we should really focus on anything that that we think needs to be changed in what we've submitted to HCD rather than adding any new programs or modifying programs just to get that done. Raphael, I see your hand.
Yeah, that actually ties into a question that I had about the sort of at the end of the memoranda. There was sort of a two-part thing. One thing was this staff recommendation on page 14 saying that we adopt a resolution that recommends the city council adopt an amendment to the general plan to incorporate the revised draft element and the CEQA exemption. So by the revised draft element, would that include any suggested revisions we're making tonight, or would it just be the revised draft element that was submitted on December 2nd?
It's my understanding, correct me, it's based on what we submitted on December 2nd, correct, Dan? Yeah, or what we turned in. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it would be the December 2nd draft. That's what's taken forward to HCD and would be recommended for adoption on January 17th. If we make any revisions, it would restart the HCD review clock and just delay that whole process.
Yeah. Which is what I think we need to avoid.
Right, I was wondering about that because it seemed like part of what we were doing was going over and reviewing things, but the other part was, something has already been submitted and there's a clock going on it. But I noticed that recommendation B was recommending that the city council authorize the city manager to make technical modifications, refinements, clarifications, including but not limited to implementation details of the proposed housing plan programs to the housing element update without requiring a subsequent hearing and readoption. New goals, policies, or programs would require readoption. So if we did want to make changes in the future, not right now, that would lead to a new goal or a policy or a program, would that require readopting the entire element, or would it require just amending the element?
If I may, David.
Yeah, go ahead.
You got a couple of options there. Some of these programs we talked about you can do, they don't have to be in your housing element. So
Yeah.
the housing element establishes your minimum. You can do additional programs outside of your housing element. So that's fine. So some of these things that we talked about as additional considerations, you could start tomorrow and the city can pursue those independent of what's required to be done as part of your housing element. That's your formal commitment. It's like a contract between the city and the state and the general public, but you can always go further. If you actually want to amend the housing element formally to include those things, then yes, you'd go through this whole process again. It'd go out for public review and then back to HCD until they're happy with it.
Yeah, to clarify, my take on that, Raphael, is that the state is really interested in whether we are allowing housing to be built. And the other things, like for instance, like, passing or like a rent control or not or a renter's protection ordinance or whatever, that's outside the housing element. I mean, it's nice to add to it, but the state's only interested in that we meet the requirements that we have and we demonstrate that we can do that. So anything we do after the housing element is gravy.
Okay. And then I had another question sort of linked to the CEQA common sense exemption that we talk about on page 13 of the staff memoranda. And it says, part of what it says there is no changes to the land uses within the city or changes to the city's general plan are proposed. But it seems to me that the staff recommendation says the first thing is we're recommending the council adopt an amendment to the general plan. That would seem like a change to the general plan to me. So are we making a recommendation that it change or are we not?
There's no, and perhaps this language, I'm pulling up the resolution, but there's no change to the land use designations in the general plan, right? We're not changing the land use element of the general plan identifies what uses are permitted at similar to the zoning code, but at a higher level. And nothing about that is changing.
Okay, because the language of the memorandum with that "or" there seems to imply not just land uses, but also changes to the general plan as a whole. And it seems like we definitely are making changes to the general plan. That's the whole point of all of this.
Well, just the housing element as part of, and because the state, you have to remember that the housing element is the only element that's required of state approval. So every 8 years, we'll be amending the general plan with our housing element, but we're not changing any other portion of the general plan to accommodate the housing element, at least at this point. Right? Is that about right, Alex? Is that kind of explaining that?
Exactly.
And Raphael, I was wondering about that same question that you asked about whether if we did change any of the zoning requirements, whether that would violate that. But as I read it, when we were saying that we didn't need to do an EIR, that was only one of the criteria. There's still other criteria that apply. So it's not just because we go change to allow housing in a church doesn't mean that we have to do an EIR for that.
Yeah, and I might point you to the language in the resolution that's a little clearer. There's a whereas that says, let me find it. Well, now I can't find it.
Yeah, there is a whereas.
But you're correct. I mean, the housing element and the general plan as an element of the general plan, but it's not changing any of the permitted uses identified in the general plan.
Okay, so I guess I would ask when we get to that point that in that particular whereas clause that we strike the bit that says or changes to the city's general plan.
No, I don't think we need to do that, Raphael, because if we just stick with the draft we submitted at ACD, we're not recommending changes to the general plan. I think that would be something that would come subsequent to us getting HCD approval.
But we,
Or perhaps you could, if it would satisfy your concern, or changes to the general plan outside of the housing element.
sure, that's fine. I wanted to be clear, but we are in fact making changes to the general plan because we are.
Mm. I don't know if we are.
Oh, I think we are.
You?
Yeah.
Jim?
I think we're also, I mean, and the door is open to make changes to the zoning ordinance.
Yeah,
If you look at program 11, that says it right there, amend the zoning ordinance to comply with SB9 standards. Isn't that the thing that was talking about changing single family to multifamily zones?
don't know.
Isn't
That-
that one?
SB 9 is the state law that allows yes, 2 units by right. But again, that itself would also be exempt from CEQA. That's already allowed under
Yeah,
state
through
law
ADU.
regardless. So it has
Yeah.
no, that would just be reflecting what's already, if someone came to us with an SB 9 application now, we would have to approve it.
Yeah, because you have to do ADUs anyway.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just kind of question, I mean, I'm kind of going at it both ways because, I've done a lot of ADUs. At the same time, I'm looking at my own street and even without ADUs, there's too many cars. And that's, if you take away the ADUs that are there now, there are 2 that are legal and 2 that are illegal that are on my street. And so already the parking is a huge problem. I've talked to you.
Yeah.
I think our street complains the most about parking than any street in the city. Yeah. And we're just a little tiny court. And so, and there's no restriction. We could all have ADUs there, junior ADUs. The house next door to us has an ADU and a junior ADU and a whole bunch of cars. And it's a constant battle within the neighbors. And that's never taken into account. The state just has blinders on and said, okay, just go ahead and do your little ADUs and take the bus. Well, there's no bus to take. So I just living through the last few months of this constant problem over and over and over. I kind of wonder if we have any say at all in any kind of thing on terms of size or street size or area, that kind of thing at all within ADUs. I haven't come across it at all because I don't think it exists.
That's right.
But at the same, so I kind of think some of the stuff we're flirting with disaster with the way our city is going to end up. I'm okay with building on churches. I'm kind of iffy about schools because where are the kids going to play if they build a bunch of apartments on them, on school grounds? And I'm certainly okay with building on dead shopping sites, like the Kmart. I was totally okay with that. Despite lots of people that complained about it, I said, complain about what? There's nothing there now. That I'm okay with, but doubling up and tripling up and quadrupling up in our neighborhoods, I am not okay with. And if this even, and I'm so concerned about this, that alone would make me vote against this.
Well, so the SB 9 is a state law. So, of course, not discounting any of your concerns. But absent the city doing something to implement state 9, SB 9, we're just stuck with whatever the state law, we can't try to tailor it within the confines of the law. We're just stuck as to SB 9.
So you're saying we're screwed pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's exactly.
but like ADU, we have some flexibility to adopt regulations. But if we don't do an ordinance at all, then we don't.
We have
any of
nothing to
that.
start with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree with that. And I agree with the other stuff that's in here, makes sense. I'm just concerned about this over densifying of existing neighborhoods or opening the door to have that. I know that there are a whole bunch of things that keep us from going out and doing that all tomorrow. There are a bunch of rules that do that, but there are lots of rules that used to keep things from being too over dense. Now we have concessions to add more height, more units, less open space. So to me, all that stuff, even our own rules or the rules the state has, could be easily unraveled because of paranoia, because they're just so afraid of not having enough housing that they're doing anything to let anything go.
well, Tim, I appreciate your concerns, but I think that's out of our bailiwick, when the state passes the laws. We have to follow what the state law is. And I know that what Alex said was about if we do not have a certified HCD housing element, we then open the door up to more we more housing, if the builders so much want to have a remedy for that, like I just read in the paper today, and I'm not sure if this exactly is a good example, but I just read where in the city of Lafayette, there's been something going on for like 10 years about them wanting to build, originally the developer wanted to build a 331 unit apartment complex, and Lafayette fought that to have no, and then they agreed to 41. And then the state court ruling came out just this week where it said, no, the 331 is, what was allowed, it's going to be allowed. So I think that if you don't approve this, this housing element, especially since we barely have enough votes, then you're going to open up the door to more issues that you probably don't like. I think it's important to go with what we have and look at any revisions, down the road.
Well, and
Well, maybe then, I mean, I agree with you on some of that. And at the same time, we can't go into this with our eyes half shut either. You have to be ready, because what you're saying is right. It's, if we don't do it, we're gonna be in trouble. If we do it, we're gonna be in trouble. But the part where we do it and we're in trouble is slightly better than not doing it. That's how I'm seeing it.
And through the chair, some of those concerns, as those programs and policies and all those implementation steps come before the planning commission, as we implement them for their review, that I think is a great time to, provide your feedback or the look at the specifics of the like if the city, as we adopt ordinances to implement those programs, you'll have another crack at the apple.
Yeah, there'll be
Yeah.
some wiggling around. You're right.
Actually,
I was kind of, it was interesting that you brought up Raphael about it doesn't change the general plan, but it really does. That's all part of it. It's just I just don't trust all the wordsmithing, and there's all these little twists and turns in this thing. It should be just a straightforward thing and have lots of neat ideas.
Yeah,
And all that. Let me finish. And that's fine. And then I'm, 2/3 of this I'm okay with. It's just this, this one little thing, and I've seen it with Minneapolis, they just got rid of single family zoning altogether with no restrictions. How often is that going to start happening?
yeah, Tim, you have some legitimate concerns. I'm looking at the protocol of our meeting in that we're actually in the public hearing.
You haven't opened the public hearing yet. We're still making our comments.
No, we're
No.
we're asking questions to the staff at this time. The protocol is that we ask questions to the staff. Then we open up the public hearing, they hear the public comments, and then we come back, bring it back to the commission for discussions like you're having right now. So I'm just saying that we need to hold that for later into the meeting, because right now we're asking questions to the staff about clarifications about the presentation.
So I'm trying to find out through what I'm saying, the clarification.
Well, I mean, like right now, I mean, as part of this, there are no changes to the densities at this point. So we're not changing any densities, we're not changing any intensities, we're not changing any zoning. None of this at this point, we amending anything but the housing element. So all we're doing is talking about the programs and the policies of the housing element. If there are things to be done later, those would be done, like if we needed to amend something later on, then we would come back and go through this process of amendment or developing that program, whatever that policy or that zone change or whatever that intensity requirement is. So the actual element isn't changing any of that. It's just saying that there are programs and potential policies that would have to be implemented later on to make sure if we were consistent with that.
Mhm.
So that's, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, so I would make an attempt to bring it back to the protocol that we're supposed to have in public hearings, where we're actually in the session where we're asking questions to staff for clarifications. Raphael, I haven't let Adam have a chance to speak yet, but did you have something real quick, or is it?
Yeah, I guess I have a quick question that we can let Adam get started on his questions, but basically, Alex, you just mentioned that the implementation of the housing plan programs would come back to the council, but it looks like staff recommendation 1B would not have that happen. It says, the city council authorized the city manager to make technical modifications, requirements, and clarifications, parentheses, including but not limited to implementation details of the proposed housing plan programs to the housing element update without requiring a subsequent hearing or readoption. So that sounds to me like it would just skip the whole planning commission input process. Am I wrong about that?
The implement, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but the implementation details are the details of how the plan identifies it will be implemented. So an ordinance still needs to come to the, if we adopt a just cause eviction ordinance, that's an ordinance. It needs to, be approved by the city council in a meeting. What the implementation details might be is if right now it says we'll do that within the next 3 years is the timeline, and change that to 2 years, like that would be what would be changed in the implementation details. The actual implementation still would need to go through the appropriate legislative body. Not every implementation would need to go through the planning commission, but any ordinance would need to go to the city council.
Okay, so it's not getting rid of everything. It's just saying for stuff that doesn't need to go to the planning commission, it still doesn't need to go to the plan.
Right, the city manager wouldn't have any authority to do any legislative act. It's that still would go to the city council. It's just about some of those details that if HCD comes back and says your timeline for this, for example, that's the example I'm using, but your timeline for this implementation, that might get tweaked a little bit. That way.
Okay. Adam, do you have anything that you'd like to question the staff with?
No, not really. And I think that this back and forth has been good. You've kind of brought me up to speed where the conversation has been for the past month or two. So I actually don't have any questions for staff right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for staff? Raphael?
Yes, I still have some other questions now that we're into on questions. I think I noted some of these down electronically this time. So let me go ahead and pull that up here. Comments. I guess there was one question I had about program 21 in the memorandum where there was an error reference source not found, but in the actual draft document, it says it's program 19. So that's not an issue with the draft. It's just an issue with the memoranda. So let's see. Questions wise, I think I may also have had one question linked to I guess on page 22 of the housing element itself. Accessible units for the physically disabled, it says remove completed reasonable accommodations procedure. I think I recall that the removal for that was because the accommodations were basically integrated into the state building code the city adopted, but I wasn't 100% sure on that. So I wanted to ask whether that was the case or whether I was misremembering.
I'm sorry, Raphael, which one's that? The access to the units? Accessible
Accessible
units for
units.
physically disabled?
Yeah, on page 22, H 4.8.
Yeah, those requirements were within the building code.
Okay.
Anything else, Raphael?
I'm just double checking here. I guess for flipping back a bit on page 17, H 4.2, whether there were any 6-cycle programs, program numbers referenced with regards to housing construction, or whether it was just more of an overall thing and not tied to any program in particular.
That program, it wasn't tied to anything in particular,
Okay.
to my knowledge.
And then on page 16, rehabilitation assistance, H 2.3, it says that there, for the continued appropriateness to retain increased program specificity, language, and metrics. I was wondering, did the city have existing metrics for rehabilitation assistance? And if so, is that information available to the public, or is it just something that we're implementing now as part of the program 15?
I can answer that question. Hi, this is Shannon.
Oh, hey, Shannon.
So if you look in the same table, to the left, that's the program from the 5th cycle housing element. And the targets were 50 units, 10 extremely low, 10 very low, 10 low, and 20 moderate. So the new program was going, kind of going off of those previous metrics and targeted number of units.
Do we know whether the city met those goals in the prior cycle? The current cycle, I guess.
Yeah, I believe many of those will be met with some of the recent projects that have been built in the last couple of years and currently entitled in the last couple of years. So I believe that those will be, well, actually, I'm not sure about the rehabilitation. I'm sorry. I was thinking about just construction of new as opposed to rehab. So I'm not sure. So I think the idea was retain and modify that those are still good goals we can carry forward.
Sure. I was just curious, in terms of our existing metrics, whether we knew how well we'd done. I get that we're setting up new metrics to be able to track that better in the future, but.
Okay,
If I could just jump in here, Commissioner Minute, I think that's a good question and something I'd love to look into to see if we have records.
And I guess one other thing. This is sort of in multiple points throughout the document. It mentions the communication and engagement plan, like on the introduction on page 10 and elsewhere. And I'm wondering when the communication engagement plan is mentioned, if there could be a hyperlink to the plan and at least the digital documents, because we have the finished plan and I assume it's available on the city's website and so on and so forth. It'll be useful to have as sort of a hyperlinked reference. And that's all my questions.
all right. I just have one quick comment. And that is, I had mentioned in a previous meeting that we had about there was an error in table 63, planning related fees, which was on page 94 that of the draft document we looked at in October, is now on page 99 of the draft we have, that the last entry in that table 63 has a number of single family variants that has $1,1650, which I believe is an error. So I think that needs to be corrected. It's page 99 of the existing.
Page 99. Okay. And what line was that? And again, this is the example. If this had been adopted when we mentioned that provision in the resolution, if we need to make some technical changes and errors, that would be a perfect example of you'd have to come back. We could make that, staff would be authorized to make that without having to go through another public hearing. So it's a good example. Oh, I see it on the bottom line, I see it right there, single family variance.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the type. It should be, I believe it's 1650, not. Yeah, I think there's an extra one in there.
there's an extra number there somewhere, but yes.
For sure.
But anyways, since there are no more questions for staff, I think I will open the public hearing to get any comment from the public. So I will do that. Justin, do we have anybody who would like to speak on that?
No one online right now, but I do have comments from Commissioner Moriarty, who isn't able to be here. So
Okay.
there was just a few brief overview comments. So Ann, here are my comments. Honestly, no major issues. I'm pleased with the additions and the inclusion of the EJ element language. Page 8, the new public review period contains repeated sentences in paragraphs 2 and 3. Throughout, I appreciate the references to the communication and engagement plan. Table 73, page 165 is helpful. Appendix A map is really different from the original. I assume the update is reflected in Appendix B. I remember the original was missing sites 30 to 44, which apparently don't exist. Thanks so much for all your work.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public that would like to speak?
Still no one from the public right now.
Okay, now I'm going to close the public hearing. And I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and action. And as I said previously here, I think the focus should be on getting HCD approval. There are a lot of issues that we want to look at in the future. We need to do, but I think we should really focus on getting HCD approval. And what I mean by that is looking at the present draft document that we got that's dated December 2nd, 2022, and see if there's anything that we want to modify with that. So with that, I saw Tim, I saw you writing a lot of things. I don't know if you brought them all up that you wanted to speak, but I'll give you, the opportunity is now for you to make those comments.
Well, like I said, I am pretty okay with most of the stuff sort of conceptually. I am hoping that we really do have the tweaking that, Alex is talking about in the future. I'm just kind of thinking about when we did my distrust of the whole thing is because, and this just goes back to when we were doing the zoning ordinance and the general plan update, which I was really involved in 10 years ago, or more than that now. At the time, the planning company that was helping us with that had figured in 20 years, Pinole will grow about 5%. At the same time, the arena numbers said we would grow almost 70%. So that made me think that the people that were doing the arena numbers had no idea what they were doing. And in fact, part of that was the reason why Pinole got out of ABAG for a while. We quit ABAG for like a year and a half. Because knowing that we would lose money, because they were waving it at us, saying, "Oh, you can't go, you lose all these grants that we're doing. We're not going to give you anywhere, and give them to Oakland, San Francisco." But that was the kind of thing. So my mistrust of the state, especially with the numbers, which I think are bogus, because now you're in the thing here. I think he said we've grown only about 8%, so it's pretty close to what they were saying. We were saying 10 years ago. For 20 years from now, we're a little bit more, but not much more. Certainly not anywhere near what they were saying before. We would all have to take in a family if that was the case. But and I guess with ADUs, you kind of are. But so I just have a general major distrust of the whole system, but at the same time, I do know you have to start somewhere and work your way kind of inwards and outwards. So, I'll probably will vote for this as much as I really don't want to.
Well, Tim, I think I'll make a comment that I think you're not alone in that feeling. I think that's the feeling that every city has about the ABAG numbers. So.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know for sure, but you know, I know that after we quit ABAG, so then Corte Madera did and then Fairfield did. So, because they were feeling it too, but I think we all ended up back in because we finally took the bribe of, oh yeah, you'll get some grants someday maybe.
Mhm.
So, anyhow, the general ideas in terms of some of the things that are in here, like I said, I'm okay with. I think people that don't have, you know, the right incomes need to have somewhere to go and have to have some help. You know, I'm okay with that. We did our last redevelopment project here with the 3 little houses on Buena Vista. And the push on that was to make sure we had somebody like, service workers of some sort, city workers, teachers. And I think one of the houses was bought by a teacher because she was able to do that. That was our last redevelopment blast, you know, and I'm totally for that. I'm just kind of thinking that as we go through these things and as we have to kind of start, you know, fiddling with them, we're hearing what's being kind of fed to us. You really got to be real careful with what we're doing. I mean, that's mainly it. The other things in here, you know, they make sense to me. So.
okay. I'm gonna let Adam, are you,
Oh yeah, I'm done.
okay, thank you. Adam, you have any comments? Any?
No, I think I'm pretty much generally okay with the housing element as it stands, and probably all the comments and everything, the back and forth that's gone on since the last meeting and the review comments. And it seems like everything's generally been looks okay to me. And I didn't realize there's a timing element of this to get something approved so that the city can review it next month. So yeah, Dave, I kind of concur with what you were saying, where we kind of have to get something done, and maybe it's not perfect, but it's something. And because the risk of not having something in place is probably a greater risk to the city as far as the exposure. Because that's the way I kind of heard the discussion the past hour or so. So I don't really have any further questions or comments. I think I'm kind of good with it as it stands.
Thank you, Adam. Raphael?
Well, I do still have some comments as separate from my earlier questions. The most important one I'd say is tied into my earlier comments about the resolution and about, let's see, this is Appendix E, the notice of exemption. I think that we should change the applicability of statutory exemption 15061B3 to modify or strike or changes to the city's general plan are proposed, because I think we're making changes to the city's general plan. So we could say no change to the general plan outside of the housing element, or just remove that altogether. But I don't think it's accurate to approve these findings as they're currently written and to approve the resolution as it's currently written. So that's my main objection currently. There's also a few other lesser comments that I'd like to make. I'm pleased with table 1 in the memoranda on page 4, noting that we have additional development sites on top of what we're submitting to the state, backup sites, to make sure that we definitely have enough units in the pipeline to be able to meet our low income housing obligations, because that was always the single area that seemed weakest to me in the plan, whether or not we'd actually be able to meet it. So knowing that we have backups there is a pretty important thing, especially including the 83 units not met with pending projects or projected ADUs. That's great. On page 6, the place-based improvements, I appreciated flagging sort of the highlight points of the future environmental justice element, equity and access, equity and environment, equity and civic engagement opportunities, and equity and generations. And I think that equity and generations in particular ties into the housing element, because if future generations don't have a place to live in Pinole, then they're going to eventually have to move elsewhere, and they're not going to have equity and generations. You can't have that if you can't be in the city as it exists. Let's see. On page 11 of the memoranda discussing the just cause eviction ordinance, I think that would be interesting looking into, but I agree with Alex's earlier comment that that would be, or maybe it was Dan, that it would be a relatively complex thing and we need to look into it later. So I'm not going to discuss it more right now. I just thought that was something interesting and maybe worth looking more into in the future. And then on page, I don't think it's actually a numbered page. It's just the back of the first page. There's immediately a note of the translation services in the various languages that we're covering. So English, Tagalog, Spanish, and Chinese, saying, you know, what the core point we want to get across is. I think that's really important to have that on the very first page before you even get to the table of contents, to make sure that people are aware of that. So I applaud having it that early and having it in the various languages that we're covering. So I think that's great. And I think that's all of my comments. I mean, a lot of my comments I made were, you know, made at the prior meeting.
Yes. Thank you, Raphael. You made a comment about, you know, stating to HCD that we actually have, other sites that we could be including in the document. I'm a little bit hesitant to actually, communicate that to HCD because they may actually say, well, why don't you put it in the general, in the housing element then? And the problem with that is that, if we don't, if those areas are not developed, within, was it 2 cycles, I think it is, of the housing element, then they're not eligible for inclusion, in, you know, that next update. So I think it's better to actually, know that we have things in reserve, but not to communicate that to HCD.
If I'm understanding it, if I'm understanding the memoranda correctly, the point of having it structured that way was to have them not be part of our sites inventory, but to explicitly say, even if there is an issue with our sites inventory, we have this backup, but it's not part of the sites inventory for the purposes of those various state laws that you mentioned. And Dave, of course, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, and Alex.
Yeah, I mean, we have, we have additional sites that aren't mentioned, that if we need to bring them up to being sites, we do, but we have them in reserve, that they're not on any maps, they're not on.
Yeah,
They're just noted that we have additional sites. So if there are sites that, for instance, are undevelopable or cannot, you know, can't be developed on for one reason or another, we have the ability to bring in additional sites. Yeah. And they're not mentioned as part of the element.
yeah, I look at kind of like when you're filling out your taxes, you kind of want to make sure that the, you don't want to give too much information to the IRS. So, but it's good to know that we have something in reserve. I just wish that there were other cities within the county and the state that would actually build something, because you had mentioned something about generational wealth, about wanting to be able to pass things down. And a lot of people look at affordable housing with a real negative because they kind of stigmatize people who are in affordable housing, but they don't realize that they're actually your sons and daughters who want to stay in the community. They're the teachers, they're the clerks that work in the store. They could be the firemen, they could be people that are very vital to our community. And you know, I like to call it more like workforce housing rather than affordable housing, which has a little bit better connotation to it. But I know that there are some cities that have been very adamant about not allowing housing in their communities. And I just wish the state would actually get on their case a little bit more and instead of expecting cities like Pinole to be providing all the housing. So anyways, I don't have any other comments except, again, I think that we're just looking at the document that was submitted to the state. I think that it would be good when there's going to be new commissioners coming on board in April or May, whenever they come on. I think that would be a perfect opportunity to actually put on the agenda about looking at the suggestions that we had made as far as making changes to the zoning code and also to the in ordinances, like, I don't know if we want to consider to have a justified eviction ordinance or not, but I think that would be probably one of the first agenda items you'd probably want to have for the new for the new planning commission, like probably around June or July to start looking into. Because they're great ideas. I would, if we had more time, I'd really like to incorporate them in a housing element. But the fact that we are kind of like are under the gun to get something approved by the state, I think we need to go with the horse that we rode in with. So with that, I think I asked Adam if he had already, I asked you, right, Adam? You can just.
Yeah, you did. I'm good. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. So unless anybody has any more comments, I would entertain a motion to as you know, per staff recommendation. If any, traditionally the chair doesn't make doesn't make motions. So if anybody else would like to do that, I'd appreciate it.
I'd like to make a motion. I would like to move that we adopt resolution 22-07 with the change that the whereas clause. Whereas the housing element update qualifies for an exemption of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, under CEQA guidelines 15061B3, as a project does not provide entitlements to land use development projects, nor the proposed development of the identified RHNA sites that could have an effect on the environment, and no changes to land uses within the city or changes to the city's general plan are proposed, to strike the or changes to the city's general plan for attachment E to the housing element, the notice of exemption findings, that the applicability of statutory exemption 15061B3, that the or changes to the city's general plan be struck there as well. And that the, let's see, I think that also the memoranda goes a little bit beyond the resolution. Oh, wait, yeah, under the be it further resolved. That's fine. So yeah, that's my motion. Just adopt the resolution with the change to the whereas clause and with the change to attachment E to the housing element, the statutory exemption findings, to strike the or changes to the city's general plan from both.
Okay, Alex, do you agree with those? Okay,
I have a question about that. To the city attorney. If we take out, and I understand that you kind of found that even though it says there's no changes, there are kind of changes. But if we take that phrase out, are we opening the door to more changes?
No, I mean that, I think, this just. Nothing is proposed as part of this to change the general plan. Outside of this, I mean, if you prefer, you could, and the commissioner agrees, could also an alternative would be, or changes to the city's general plan outside of the housing element. Then you clarify there aren't changes besides the housing element, and you can keep that language regarding no changes to the general plan. But to answer your original question, no, it doesn't open up the door for that.
Okay, because I just was checking, because I just kind of thought of that just as you said that, I'm not really concerned about the other parts of the general plan. I'm more concerned specifically with the housing element.
No, and I mean, of course, the city council could decide to change the general plan in the future. But that would have to undergo CEQA.
Yeah, there'll be,
review,
yeah,
and that whole process.
Okay, that's all.
okay. Is there a second for that?
Well, I guess I'll second.
Thank you, Tim. Any discussion? Then I'll bring the matter to a vote. I guess, because of the fact we're not all here, I guess we'll do a roll call.
Right. Commissioner Menace,
Aye.
Commissioner Benzuli,
Aye.
Commissioner Benuelos.
Aye.
Chair Curran,
Aye.
motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. So we have a housing element and I'm very optimistic about this being approved very quickly because it's very great. You know, again, I just want to express my gratitude to the consultants that worked on this because it's a very, very good document. And I think that everybody in the city should probably read it and really get an idea what our city's all about. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd also like to express my gratitude for all the work that, the consultants did to put this all together and that, city staff also did put this all together and, the feedback from the community as well. I mean, we're going ahead and approving this at the planning commission level, but without all your input and work, we wouldn't have anything to approve in the first place.
No, thank you. Okay, thank you all. We'll move on to the next item, which is old business. We have none. We have new business, the planning commission regular meeting schedule for 2023. I think we all received the proposed schedule in our minutes. I don't know if we need to have a staff report on that.
Nope, we don't, as long as you guys are all in conjunction with those meeting dates, if there are anything else. And we wanted to go with the 2 meeting just for flexibility of time, whether how projects are landing and that kind of stuff, so that if we have to cancel, we can cancel. But
Sure.
At least they're all there.
Sure. I kind of checked to make sure that there weren't any conflicts with holidays. That's usually where we stumble. I didn't see any. Does anybody have any comments about the proposed schedule?
I did the same. I didn't see anything that would be an issue. I think I'm fairly good with it as well.
Okay. If there's no more other comments, I guess we can take a motion.
I move that we adopt the schedule for next year as presented.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. I'll bring it up for a vote. Again, I guess we got to do a roll call.
Commissioner Menes,
Aye.
Commissioner Benzuli,
Aye.
Commissioner Benuelos.
Aye.
Chair Curran,
Aye.
motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. All right, so that brings us to item H, which is the city planners commissioners report. Mr. Hannum, do you have any comments?
Just that we're continuing processing the Pinole Shores 2 project. So we're continuing that and hopefully you'll see that here in the near future. We're moving forward on that. We are as you saw on the doctor's hospital site, they've got their demo permit and they're demoing. They've demoed per se. So the building is pretty much down at this point. So they're moving forward with that. We're Plains Department is working on our objective standards program. And so hopefully we'll have something relatively soon, but we've worked with our consultant and outlined a lot of those. So we'll be bringing those forward as well. Other than that, we're still in the new year. We will be bringing forward our Sparklet stuff. So we'll let you know that that's coming forward in the new year. So other than that, that's all I have. Unless Justin, yeah.
Okay. No, just the procedural thing. I just want to read the appeal provision since we didn't cover that yet. So for anyone interested in appealing item E1, it is an action. So even if it's just a recommendation of the council, I just want to read the appeal language. Any person may appeal an action of the planning commission or of the planning manager by filing an appeal with the city clerk. In writing within 10 days of such action, following a public hearing, the city council may act to confirm, modify, or reverse the action of the planning commission, and the planning commission may act to confirm, modify, or reverse the action of the planning manager. The cost to appeal a decision is $500 and a minimum $2,500 deposit fee. So thanks. Just wanted to make sure we have our bases covered.
Well, yeah, but in practicality, since this is going before the city council on January 17th, anybody who has any objections will certainly have their ability to express their comments at that city council meeting without having to pay anything. So I think I would just, point that out. Okay. Is any?
Yeah, I have a quick question for on the commission, the staff report.
Sure, go ahead, Adam.
The project that is kind of opposite the Z-shaped one on San Pablo that was approved probably earlier this year. But it's on the other sites on the east side of San Pablo.
Are you talking about the
It looks like
veterans,
that-
the veterans,
I think so, yeah, I think it was the one we approved just before the one that was on the west side of the street, maybe as across from San Isidro. What's the status of that? How come it hasn't seemingly broken ground or done anything yet?
That's the Saha project. They had some funding fall out during, as part of their package. However, they've been able to reaccommodate that. So we're working with them right now and hopefully they'll get a building permit. I know they've got a date fairly shortly that they have to have their building permit by. And so we're reviewing their plans, getting ready to review their plan sets and all that. So they're moving forward. But they dropped for a little while. They had some funding issues that they've got, that they now have gotten clarified. They've gotten additional funding. So.
Okay, cool.
thank you. Does anyone else have any, Raphael?
Yeah, so I have some sort of communication / future agenda items. I don't know whether that falls under commissioner's report or communications here.
Why not?
Okay, so first off, in terms of future agenda items, I read an interesting article in the San Francisco Chronicle back on, what was it? October 30th. It's been a while since our last meeting. About rain gardens that they're implementing in the city of San Francisco, not just like the sort of bioretention swales that we saw at the Kmart project, but full on broader rain gardens that can be maintained by the city and maintained by the local community too, sort of citywide beautification project. That's where if we could have a future agenda item to sort of discuss that possibly, that idea.
Mhm.
And then the other thing was I got an ex parte communication from Mr. Vosbrink, and he asked whether a few potential agenda items could be brought up. Let's see if I can pull that up here. So with regards to the TV broadcast, having the public access Zoom television information and the phone numbers that can be called, having that as part of the banner. I think that was brought up with regards to the city council meetings as well at a prior meeting. But I think it's worthwhile to have it for the planning commission meeting as well, just so it's easier for people to call in. Because looking at a TV screen right now, I just see a header saying, it's the planning commission, the date, the time, but I don't see contact information on there. And I think that that'd be worthwhile. And then let's see. I guess it was a question. The other thing was a question with regards to the additional cost to the city caused by ADUs and tenants, house boarders, renters, etc.
What was that, Raphael? I didn't quite understand you.
So Mr. Vosbrink also had a question about the cost to the city incurred by ADUs, renters, tenants, especially if they're not reported to the city, as you know, city ordinance requires. And then finally, another question with regards to, does the city have enough code enforcement officers to meet current and future demands? And with regards to code violations and code enforcement, I know that was an issue, but the council was addressing this, but I think that might be more a matter for city staff to reach back to Mr. Vosbrink on rather than a future agenda item for the commission. But I do think that it might be worth considering the additional costs created by tenants and, how effective our code enforcement policies are in catching the new rentals, because people might not be aware that, they need to get a permit from the city if they're renting out rooms in their homes and so on and so forth. I mean, not a permit, but basically like a business license, except it's the rental inspection fee and so on and so forth. That might be something worth bringing up as sort of a public notification or a future agenda item. I don't know.
Is that under our purview or is that more of a city council thing? Because I think of that, all that is more of a city council thing than planning commission thing.
Well, yeah, I see what you're saying, Tim, but I think things like the banner about the calling in, I think that's something that we should implement. We can ask David to do that.
Yeah, we can work on that.
Yeah, see what, that'd be way
Yeah.
better than spilling it all out at the beginning. By the time you're saying it, you've already forgotten what you started with.
I know, that's, as the chair, I find that something to stumble over real easily.
That's kind of weird too.
But you also mentioned about the code enforcers. I think another area that's really not understood in the city is the tree ordinance about where you just can't cut down trees without getting a
Tree removal permit.
permit. And because I've had that encounter with some neighbors, and the tree people there say, oh, we don't need it, just a pine tree. Well, but it's a protected tree. And so I think that's another area where there's not proper education and enforcement.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure whether that falls under, something the planning commission can discuss or whether that would need to go up to the city council level to discuss, but I figured it might be something we can consider, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it back and discuss it with Lily and see what we want to do. And if we have some items we can bring back, if not, we'll update you where we're at with those. Whether they're just informational items that we bring back to you, or if you want full agenda items on them.
Yeah.
That might be just informational, because the planning commission generated the tree removal.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we've communicated to the staff, the concerns. I think rain gardens is something, but, I think that, I know that before the meeting, you were showing that article to David. I think it would be something that the Pinole Garden Club would really be interested in. That they could, may want to build them and maintain them. So I think they're, it's probably somebody that should be included in that. Anything else?
Nope, that was it. But I
Adam?
agree with your comment about the garden farm.
Adam?
I'm good.
I don't have anything. I
have something. I'd like-
did I skip over
You
you? I'm
skipped
sorry.
over. I'd like to communicate with our city attorney. What's going on with the historical overlay stuff?
That went to the city council and they decided not to move forward with it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Really?
I can provide a bit more detail on that because I was at that council meeting. Basically, the way it worked was 2 council members had to recuse themselves because of living in the area, which meant they needed to have 3 votes to move anything forward. So like future agenda item, anything. And there were 3 votes. So it just died completely. It's not going to a future commission. It's not a future agenda item. It's gone at the moment.
Yeah.
as I understand it.
So because council members live in the wrong neighborhood, the whole thing went out the window, huh? That's pretty lame.
That really is. That really is, because it's like, Pinole is a small city and it's like you're gonna be stumbling over, where you live and
Yeah, because there was a bunch of time spent on that and a lot of good things came out of that. There was a lot of policies in the works that were starting to come up that would preserve some of the more historic areas and identify things that people wouldn't think of historic that really are.
Actually, I've got sort of a question linked to that, sort of
Okay.
through the city attorney, maybe. Now that Councilmember Sasai is on the council, would he be eligible to vote on those, or would is his home within the district, so he'd be excluded?
I mean, I don't know where he lives, so I can't comment on that, but I think, that item, if the council decide to, put a future agenda item on that, they could move forward and at that point, but I think for now, it's, it's not going to be brought back to the
Right.
council.
That's-
I'm
that's
not
always
sure. I
wondering
don't know where the new council member lives, so I can't speak. to
Yeah.
that.
I was just wondering because if Councilmember Sasai is still within the district, then we've still got that same 2-1 deadlock. But if he isn't within the district, then we could potentially have a vote, depending on, of course, how he feels like voting on that,
Yes,
et cetera, et cetera.
Just for the commission's general knowledge to the the rules differ too if you own or you rent too. So even if you rent, but even if you live within the district, but you're a renter, you still might be able to participate. Where in a way that if you owned your property, you wouldn't be able to participate.
Yeah. Well, there has to be a way, Alex. I'm sure you can find it that people, because this is, I agree with Tim. That's pretty lame about people having to recuse themselves from voting on something when it's not avoidable. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to do city business when you can't get enough people who live out of the area to vote on.
Well, if there are not, if more than more than two people have been recused, there is a process to bring back a third, so you can have a quorum consider it, but because there are, three members who are eligible to participate in required
Yeah,
three, a unanimous vote. And the council heard, some concerns from a few people about
sure.
uh,
Well,
about
maybe
moving forward.
you could have Raphael sit in temporarily for one of the recused council people. I do have a question about the parklet ordinance. It seems to me that except for the old Annie's Cafe, I don't know what Susan's Kitchen, I think it is.
Yeah.
I think that's about the only parklet that I noticed on the street.
Yeah, I mean, but there are some other businesses that want to maintain theirs ongoing, that are on the property, and so we're kind of including some of that language. There'll be some language including, what to do about those parklets as well. We're calling them parklets, even though technically they're not on the right of way, but
Yeah,
but we're considering the parklet outdoor dining area, so.
yeah, because to me, I think the main issue that I had with the parklets was who the ownership and what the responsibility is, because we're allocating city-owned property to a commercial concern.
Right,
Right.
and we're addressing that. I know
Yeah.
that was a big concern, and we are addressing that, and who owns what and who's responsible for maintenance and all that. That would all be coming forward to you.
Oh, great.
So, yeah.
All right. I don't know if anybody else has any comments, no communications. Our next planning commission regular meeting is January 9th, 2023. I'd like to wish everybody who's listening to this and to the commissions to have happy holidays and a great new year. So we'll see each other on January 9th. Meeting is adjourned. Well, yeah, I was hoping.